Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan. Welcome back to the bunker. It's time for another You Made Me Watch. And this time, You Made Me Watch Catch Me If You Can, which was a Steven Spielberg film from 2002 starring Tom Hanks and Leonardo DiCaprio, and with a star-studded cast of all kinds of people that you've heard of and that have done all kinds of stuff then and now. A couple of actors that got a lot bigger later on, but several huge stars from the day, including people like Martin Sheen and Christopher Walken, of course, but also this is one of the first movies or roles on screen at all for Amy Adams, really young Amy Adams here, right around her Smallville days. In fact, or I say days, she was in one episode. In fact, I want to say this must have been filmed after or just around the Smallville appearance that she had. But anyway, this movie was requested by TH1, so thanks a lot to you, Tom, really appreciate it. This falls squarely in the category of movie I have seen before that didn't really change my mind about what I felt about it watching it another time. This is probably the only movie that I've done on You Made Me Watch that somebody requested on Patreon that I've seen more than one time before. I own this movie, always really enjoyed this movie. I was a little late to the party on this, but at this point, it's been years and years since I first saw it. I probably got a hold of this movie, I don't know, just after I got married, maybe just before, I forget. I was married in 2008, and I got this movie right around then. I don't even remember how I found out about it. This was real under the radar for me, which is odd because looking at the box office, it was a pretty big movie for this genre anyway. This is one of those Steven Spielberg movies that's not a huge blockbuster thing, that wasn't a giant headline maker. It's just a good, solid movie. This was his first biopic, if you can call it that. I'm always fuzzy on what exactly counts these days as a biopic, but this is a based on a true story movie, based on a book that was co-written by Frank Abagnale himself, the con artist that the movie is about. This is a film that is about crime, that actually has a happy ending, and it's not just because, it's not just to make it Hollywooded, it's because the actual story has a happy ending. This is one of those rare cases where life ends up kind of imitating art, where if you scripted this film as a complete fiction with this premise, as a movie that was kind of safe, trying to make it accessible to a lot of different kinds of people, this is more or less probably the way it would turn out. And there is certainly plenty of good drama here. This is a movie that really spoke to me on a personal level, especially with what it has to say about children and divorce and broken families and what that does to kids. But so it certainly rings true on a lot of levels, but especially with the way it ends, it looks curiously like a Hollywooded movie, and it's just kind of the perfect thing to base a movie on, because that is more or less the way it actually turned out. I looked into how different the film is from real life, and the most important things are accurate. The biggest things that are changed, and I will spoil some things with this movie. This has been out a long time. I'm sure most of the people that would think to click on this have seen this movie before. So if you haven't seen it, before I go any further, let me just say I am certainly feeling it. This falls in the category for me of really decent, based on a true story or biopic kind of movies. It's super entertaining. It's crazy watchable. It's a really good, solid story and character study and kind of dual protagonist film for both the con artist and the FBI agent that's chasing him. But it's also just a really fun, solid flick. It's a really good kind of family experience, I think. I don't think this is a bad thing to show your kids. And if you've not seen this movie, I would certainly recommend checking it out. Really, no matter what your sensibilities are, I think this is a pretty accessible movie, and it's a really good comedy. I was kind of surprised. I'll get back to what I was talking about in a second, but I was kind of surprised looking at the DVD when I pulled this off my shelf that this falls in the category officially of comedy, and I had never really thought about it that way before, but it really is. And interestingly, kind of exactly the same way that the biopic, or again, based on a true story movie that Tom Hanks was in last year, the Fred Rogers movie, Won't You Be My Neighbor, kind of counts as a comedy. It is a really dramatic film. It's a dramedy, certainly, before it's anything else, but I didn't remember this being as much of a rousing comedy as it is. Like, it's not a laugh every few seconds kind of thing, but it's just made with a lot of humor, if that makes any sense. Like, the filmmakers are finding, the writer and Steven Spielberg, and even the score by John Williams, finding the humor in all of this. It never takes itself too seriously, even though these things really happened. It's finding a really nice line between taking it seriously enough that I'm finding it believable that these things are really happening and that the characters are resonating with me, and that's not making fun of these people, but at the same time, I'm able to also laugh with it, because there's an inherent absurdity in this premise. This is, like, if this was a fiction, you'd be like, well, that's a really fun idea. It's a little far-fetched, right? Like, this is not a thing that could ever really happen in real life. And so it becomes a stranger-than-fiction kind of situation, and I think it's made even more fun by the fact that most of it really actually happened. And so it has, curiously, this really kind of heightened sense about it, too. And I think in some places that goes a little bit too far. I have very few criticisms about this film, but this is kind of where my main criticisms lie, is just in the overall tone of it. There are a couple of things that I think push it too far into the stylistic category when it's supposed to be more of a, like, real-life thing that really happened. Although, I guess I'm of two minds about it, because you could argue, well, because it's stranger than fiction, and like, this is the reason it's having so much fun with itself, and I'm praising it for doing that, because it's a stranger than fiction kind of thing, not that movie, but it is a, story that is stranger than a lot of fiction. It's crazy that it really happened. It seems like it was cooked out of some writer's imagination. It seems like, it's wanting to play itself as a little bit more over the top because it's so crazy that it really happened. But so I get that, and like, I think that the kind of rose-tinted glasses 60s look and feel here that we have is kind of appropriate for this, sort of looking at all of this in hindsight. It's like, we don't have a bookend or anything. We don't have, like, the actual Frank Abagnale, like, telling the story, or like an older version of him, saying, back in my day, here's this crazy thing that happened. Isn't it so strange that I did, all these check forgeries and made millions of dollars and didn't end up spending my life in prison, or even the 12 years I was supposed to serve, and now I'm in the FBI and stopping the same people that did what I did. Like, isn't that a crazy story? Nobody would ever believe that, but it really happened. You don't have that kind of a bookend, but it does sort of feel like it's from that perspective, where it's very much looking back at these events with a lot of perspective, and again, with a lot of humor. But at the same time, some things are a little bit more heightened and over the top than other things, so it's slightly inconsistent about it. This is real minor. This is very nitpicky. Tom Hanks is doing an accent that I think is a little too over the top, and he has a history of this. It's interesting that he's able to get away with it, because his performance is otherwise so genuine and believable that that just becomes kind of part of the package after a while. This like really crazy, kind of, I don't know if he's supposed to be from Boston, but it sounds to me like a Bostonian accent, or maybe it's supposed to be like a really out there New York accent, but because I forget where exactly he's from, but it's I guess it's probably supposed to be New York, right? But anyway, that kind of just becomes part of the charm after a while, but I had to adjust to it. The other thing is, there are some things that are made a little crazier than they happen in real life, and I just don't think that's necessary with a thing like this that already watches like, well, surely somebody just wrote this down. So the real Frank Abagnale, in an interview that he gave in 2017, said that one of the things that they changed was the way that he gets out of the airplane toward the end. So there's a scene where he goes into the lavatory, the bathroom on the airplane, and he is distraught about learning finally that his father has died. And I think he is legitimately distraught, so very often he'll find himself in situations where he can try to escape when he didn't actually go there to escape, where it really was, the reason that he went there was genuinely, truthfully, the reason he said he was going there, but then he goes, oh, aha, this is actually a way I can escape, and so that ends up trumping everything. That's always the priority, is running, is escaping. He's kind of like Kate Austin from Lost. He's always running. And so he, in the movie, and I thought this was crazy. I thought this was unbelievable, and was not surprised when it turned out that this is not what really happened. He actually did escape an airplane in real life, which is nuts and kind of awesome, but he gets, like now I've got to listen to this guy. Now I've got to read this guy's book, because I had watched this movie a few times before, but I'd never really thought about the true story of it. It's sort of like A Beautiful Mind, where, like, intellectually I knew it was a true story, but I never thought to go look at the things that actually happened, and now I'm super curious. This was a thing that was in development hell, by the way, since 1980, all the way up until 97, when the rights went to a different company, and that's why Spielberg was able to finally make it. And the book was put out, I think, in 1980 or right around there, of the same title, Catch Me If You Can. Now I really want to listen to this guy speak and go read his book. He gets out of the plane in the movie version by going, he takes like a panel off a wall, and he manages to get into the wall and somehow get out of the plane under the, like, undercarriage. And he faked being a pilot for a long time, so, like, maybe he knows the intricacies of the airplanes well enough to know, like, all the inner workings of the plane and how to get out the bottom, but I found that really far-fetched, and I also just wondered if that was even possible, like, if it was, if the, you know, inner workings of the plane were set up in such a way where a human being could fit through enough of it that you could come out the bottom. He went out in real life through the, like, kitchen service. So, like, somehow he got, like, he managed to wheel himself out through something that had to do with the kitchen. I'm not sure, I don't know the details. I just saw a little quote about that. So, I don't know, it just, that whole thing was a lot more far-fetched than what really happened, and it's weird that Spielberg, I don't know if he was just looking for something akin to a, like, bigger, because it's not a real long scene or anything, but and it's not even exactly the climax, but some sort of, like, more exciting, grand, like, tense moment where you wonder if he's gonna actually make it, or, you know, how exactly did he do that. But, like, it's crazy accurate, apparently, from what I've read, to the way all the forgeries were done, with every kind of check that he forged and all of those little details, which is one of my favorite things about the movie. All of the, you know, the ingenuity that Frank shows and resourcefulness, where he's taking, like, with Pan Am, when he's pretending to be an airline pilot and cashing fake checks, because remember, he makes like $1 million just with the airport, or excuse me, the airline service, pretending to be a pilot, and then he does it as a doctor, and then he does it as a lawyer, and he even convinces a woman's father who he wants to marry. I'm jumping all over the place. He even convinces this woman's father, who is a lawyer, that he was a doctor and wants to be a lawyer. Like, he even convinces this guy that he wants to be both things. That's how fantastic of a con artist he is. And it's hard not to admire him, even if, of course, you don't condone his actions. And so there's all these really cool details, like he takes these toy airplanes and he peels the stickers off of them because they're the right size for what it would be on the checks for the Pan Am logo. And I imagine that all of those kinds of things were real and actually happened, the way Abagnale talks in the interview that he finally did only a few years ago about this movie, because he hadn't really spoken about it before. So, like I said, this movie it resonates with me on a real deep personal level because of what it has to say about divorce and family and children trying to figure out who they are and find their way when their parents divorce. And the biggest thing for me was very early on. Honestly, it's funny, as much as this movie resonates with me, I had forgotten this detail, and maybe it's the reason that it was always the reason that it does, and I just didn't think about it, because, and I don't want to get too personal here, but it reminds me of painful things from my own past, and maybe it's one of those things that I just didn't think too much about because it hit so close to home, but it's also one of the reasons that I like the movie so much. So Frank's parents decide to divorce because his mother has been cheating on his father, and because his father has been dodging the IRS and has been, I assume, also writing hot checks, but I'm not totally sure. One of the things I really like about this movie, by the way, is some of the ambiguity is really good. It's not really that important whether I know that part of it or not. Like, there's maybe a couple of places where, with the movie not holding your hands too much, I'm a little confused on things I wish I wasn't, but by and large, I kind of like some of the ambiguity. Like, in that particular moment, and this becomes clear, it's just a matter of the movie not feeling the need to give us a bunch of exposition and spell it out. I guess what I'm saying is, there's a lot of really nice subtext. I'm able to read between the lines this whole movie, and it's cool because it does watch really effortlessly. Like I said, it's a really watchable movie, but at the same time, I feel like it's letting my brain do some of the work. So I don't feel like I'm working really hard watching this movie. It doesn't feel like a job like some movies that manage that kind of do. It's really impressive that it does both of those things at the same time, where, like, it feels like a fun popcorn movie on one end, but it's also like a good novel on the other end, where it's not telling me everything, it's letting me do some of the work. And so in that moment, it makes it really clear that Frank's mom is cheating on his dad, but it doesn't come out and say that that's what's happening or exactly why. It's just the events in the order that we're getting them, the cause and effect of it, it becomes really clear that that's what's going on. And so he is given a choice of which parent to live with. And I will speak from experience because this also happened to me. That's absolutely crushing. It's an impossible decision. And he did, I have to say, precisely what I wanted to do in that moment, which is he runs away from home. And it happened to me younger, but he's like 17 when it happens to him. And so he leaves home, and he, because of the way he was taught by his father, becomes a con artist. And his father wasn't a good con artist, or a great con artist, I should say. I mean, that's the reason that he loses all of his money, and they have to move from a big house to a small apartment, and ultimately he, gets in trouble with the IRS, and he starts having major family problems. He's lucky that he didn't go to prison, probably. Again, we're never told exactly what all the problems were with the IRS. And he's got to be good at it to some degree because he's got this reputation as being like a pillar of the community, and he's in all these like high-class clubs, and you get the sense, like, he gives his wife this really nice life, and you get the sense that he's hoodwinked and swindled a lot of people to get there. But his son is way better at it. And in a really odd way, because of course this is all illegal and you shouldn't do these things, but he ends up being really proud. This is Christopher Walken. He's fantastic in this, by the way. He ends up being really proud of his son because his son, as all parents want their children to be, good parents anyway, ends up doing better than he did and doing what he wants to do better than he managed to do. I also like that, like the movie is made in some ways, maybe this is reading too much into it, but in some ways the same way that Frank lives his life. Like, Frank, in order to understand Frank, you have to read between the lines, just like you do in understanding some of the things that are going on in this movie. There's other stuff like Hanratty is sometimes lying and sometimes telling the truth, and this is the FBI agent that is going after our other protagonist. He's the other protagonist in the film. So he's going after Frank the whole movie. By the end of the film, they will end up being friends, and I really like the slow burn to that, and I found that really believable. So you have things like Hanratty telling Abagnale that he has a 4-year-old daughter and that he has a family, and he's not real consistent with his lying, where at first he's got a wedding ring and he says, I have a family, and then later it's, I had a family, but I don't anymore, and it's, I have a 4-year-old daughter, and then later it's, I have an 11-year-old daughter, but some time passed. I'm not actually, by the end of the movie, totally sure how much of the family thing, by the way, with him is true. I don't know if Carl Hanratty had a family. He has a line toward the end where he says that at some point you have to kind of live the lie. Like, it makes life easier. Like, he knows that everything he said is not true, but it kind of lessens the pain by just living as if it were. I don't know if that means that his wife kept his daughter and he doesn't actually get to see her all that often the way he's saying. Like, I don't know if at the end when he was supposed to get on that airplane and go to that trip, if he was actually really going to see her or not. The movie doesn't make that real clear. And again, it's been a while since I've seen this movie. Maybe on yet another viewing that would make a little bit more sense, but I don't, and I didn't look into this part of it. I didn't look into the Carl side of it. In real life, by the way, he has a different name because that actual guy didn't want his name in the film. I forget his name right off. But anyway, Frank will write his father letters that claim that he's doing all the things that he's pretending like he's doing, but in such a way where his dad, who is also the consummate con artist, but not as good as his son, understands what he's doing and he's able to read between the lines. So he'll say, I'm an airline pilot now, or I'm a lawyer now, and you can tell, so again, his father has to read between the lines, but we also have to read between the lines. You can tell on Christopher Walken's face, he knows that his son is making all this up, and he knows that he's writing hot checks, and he knows that he's making a living in a really dishonest way, and he's super proud of him because that's what he always tried to do and didn't do it successfully, and he's lost everything now. Like, he doesn't give his message to his son isn't, don't be like I was. Don't make the same mistakes I did morally. Ethically, his message to his son is, don't make the same mistakes I did, as in, be smarter than I was about all your con jobs. And B, it justifies his worldview. Toward the beginning of the movie, Frank's father, Christopher Walken's character, says, the banks have all the money, as in, the way to make your way in the world is not to work hard and assume that the world or the society you live in is honest and will reward you for doing good, honest work. It's to game the system, because the system is unfair and broken, but also that's just the way Christopher Walken's character likes it. Like, it seems like he uses that, as, like I said, as a justification, and that it's an excuse in order to take advantage of people, because that's fun to him, and maybe because he doesn't really have a lot of other skills. To be honest, we don't really know a ton about his background and what any of his skill set is beyond he can get people to believe pretty much anything he tells them. Like I said, that he's not as good at it as Frank is. Frank figured out how to do the forgeries for hot checks. That's just a thing that this guy never thought of. Like, maybe the idea isn't that he's bad at it, it's just that we're seeing him at the end of it, at the end of his rope. Hanratty throughout the movie says, at some point we're going to catch you. Like, you can't run away from the system forever. Like, you're really good at this, way to go, bully for you, but at some point, like you're going against the odds. There's too much against you, of course, and maybe that's just what has happened to his father by the end of the movie. I mean, to be fair, he is an older guy. He has done this a long time, and he was a pretty wealthy guy. I don't think he was a millionaire, but he was very comfortable, and the sense I get, again, subtext, we're not told exactly this, but the sense I get is he probably never worked a day in his life. He probably spent his whole life doing this, conning people, being in the Rotary Club, not really deserving it. And so this whole thing starts with a checkbook. At the beginning, he says the bank has all the money. Like I said, meaning you have to get it from them any way you want to. Almost like a Robin Hood sort of thing, where like the people in power don't deserve power, and that makes it fine for anybody to take as much of it away from them as they can. And that's his justification. Here is a checkbook. You have 50 checks. That gives you the keys to the kingdom. As long as you've got a connection with the bank, a way to get their money away from them, you deserve to do that. You don't have to earn the money for yourself. And he takes that and he runs with it, and he believes that. And so, you know, I always say when kids go with the wrong crowd or they go down the wrong path, very often it can be traced back to bad backgrounds, and you can blame the parents. And in a really weird way, I both can blame the parents in this case, but also admire the father to some degree. And I say the father just because we don't know a whole lot about the mother, but like she seems like a fine person, except for, well, I say that she cheated on her husband. I guess she's not that sympathetic. I guess all we really have with her is he met her in France. They got married after 6 weeks. I think that's what they said. They weren't together very long. Am I remembering that right? Hopefully I'm not getting that from something else I just watched, but I think that's in this. Like 6 weeks in, they get married, and they seem good together, but he's a con artist and she ends up being a cheater. She cheats on her husband. So anyway, so like yeah, they're not the best people, but like they raise their son the best they can with these, you know, a couple of moral foibles that they have, but they clearly care about their kid, and they're trying as parents. You know, you have to kind of look at it from their perspective and from this somewhat morally dubious perspective, right? And so, like, on the one hand, obviously, Frank didn't have the right kind of upbringing. His father didn't give them the right kind of guidance, because when he runs off, he thinks that the only way he can really make it is to be a con artist, and also he mostly does it because he enjoys it, and he likes the thrill of the chase once he thinks that there's nowhere else for him to go. Like, he tries to settle down and have a family with the daughter of that lawyer, and when she basically tries to turn him in and turns against him, and that doesn't end up working, then the first thing he wants to do is go back to his family. And when he sees that his mother is remarried and has a daughter now, which by the way is another thing that didn't happen in real life, he decides, okay, there's really nowhere else for me to go, nothing else for me to do but to continue being a con artist like my dad was. And he wants to keep impressing his father. Like, that's the main thing that he cares about. And so on the one hand, he's got that, you can look at it as a messed up psychology, I guess, but then on the other hand, his father did give him all of the tools that he needed to survive and to ultimately, when it's all said and done, in a very roundabout way, led him to enormous, massive success. And I don't think the movie is condoning, of course, turning your kid into a con artist and teaching him to not respect the law and not respect hard work. And yet, he did give him the skills that ultimately led to him being a legitimate millionaire. Because when you get to the end of the movie and you have the obligatory, here's what happened years after with this protagonist, which with biopics and based on true story things, I'm never totally sure how I feel about, because this is something of a fiction based on things that really happened, and I don't care how much it deviates if the story is good, but it also wants you to know what happened at the end, which kind of tells you, which kind of would suggest to people that don't do their homework, this is 100% exactly what happened. I have given this speech before, but we're in that territory again, so I feel like I have to talk about it again. That's why I always feel kind of weird about the text at the end of a movie like this that says, here's where this person is now, or here's what happened to them years later. But for the sake of the fiction, I'll say that regardless of whether or not even that was true, and it is a good, it's a good ender. It tells you that this guy, fictitious or not, was successful. Like, because to be fair, I've seen this with fictional films before too, right? Like, and then 20 years later, they died in a horrible accident. Like, sometimes it's important in a story to know what the ultimate payoff was for everything. It can feel like kind of a cheat. Maybe you want it in scene. Case by case. I have to look at a piece and tell you if I think that the text at the end is a good idea or not. But in this particular case, I don't think we needed a scene where they're elderly and still friends, like Hanratty and Abagnale. So, like, we know that they have become good friends and that they, you know, care about each other, they're working together, and then it says, and to this day, they still are, and it says that Abagnale has helped the FBI with countless forgery cases. He knows what he's talking about because he did all this, and he was the world's foremost forger, and now he's the world's foremost expert, or one of them, on this subject, and he even helped to create some of the checks that are really difficult to forge now, and so he's become, you know, a benefit to society. But, like, once you have that, once you know that, and it's really careful about the wording, right? Because he made millions of dollars, at least $4 million from his forgeries, and then it says at the end, working for the FBI, he has made millions more. And I don't think it says more, but he's made millions of dollars now legitimately as a real contributing member of society. So it gets kind of odd. Like, I'm not saying that it means that his father was right, but his father wanted to give him the tools to succeed based on his own worldview, and by the end of the day, that is kind of actually what happened. So it's just, in a movie with a real happy, I'm not going to say sappy, sort of Hollywood ending, with a guy that should have served a bunch of time in prison, who ultimately didn't have to, who ran again and then made the right decision and wasn't caught and wasn't thrown back in jail, you still have a sense of that the world is not entirely fair, that the world is not black and white. But what's weird is, inside of that fairness is also some degree of justice, too. Like, his father didn't do the right thing by him exactly, but he was just a kid when he did all of this. Like, I'm convinced that if he was in his mid-20s when he was caught by Hanratty, he probably wouldn't have gotten the deal where he gets to go work for the FBI to finish off his sentence, and he gets to live in an apartment, and he doesn't have to be in prison anymore. And let's keep in mind, too, of course, that this is a guy who did have certainly plenty of consequences for his crimes. I mean, he spent 2 years in a really bad, messed up French prison, and it took Hanratty forever to extradite him. And so, you know, depending on how you feel about the crime that he did and what the punishment should be, he was supposed to serve 12 years because he worked for the FBI. He didn't have to do that, but he did live for 2 years in a prison that was way worse than anything we had here, arguably, and where he would have been probably in the maximum security prison, even having to be isolated and all of that. And so the reason I say that there's maybe some justice wrapped up in that unfairness is this was just a kid. He was a 17-year-old kid who didn't have the right guidance. He certainly was responsible for his actions, but you have to take everything on a case-by-case basis. And I think part of the reason I like this movie is it feels like there's kind of some justice in the universe, and because it actually really happened, it feels that way. Certainly you could just write this down and say, and then they lived happily ever after, and, you know, yay, we can have some hope for the world. But part of the reason it's hopeful is because the important stuff really happened, and part of the reason it feels hopeful is because it's a single character that made that happen. The FBI didn't care about this kid. Hanratty did, and I think the you know, the juxtaposition between these guys is really interesting, and the way that they lift each other up and help each other become better people kind of accidentally is also really great. It's not the yin-yang buddy cop thing. It's that you you have a guy who is obsessed with catching this kid, and he probably doesn't even understand why. I think he can relate to this kid to some degree. I think he's running because he, on one side it's a coming-of-age story, and on the other side it's almost a midlife crisis kind of story. So you've got Frank running because he doesn't feel like he has a life anymore, and he doesn't have a family anymore. And you have this other guy who either lost his family or never had one and wishes that he did. Maybe at the end of the day it doesn't even really matter. If I missed exactly what that was and you know about it, leave a comment please, because like I said, I'm a little bit on the fence about whether or not he actually had a kid. I'm not, and a divorce, I'm not sure. But he also has some of the skills that Frank has, and he is able to outsmart him. Like, it's a great cat and mouse movie. They both keep outsmarting each other, and it's kind of an arch nemesis becomes best friends kind of thing. It's the inverse of the Clark Lex Smallville thing, etc., etc. You know, the age-old superhero thing of the superhero and villain who are arch nemesis for all time, but sometime when they were younger they were best friends. This is like the inverse of that, and the reason that he is so obsessed, I think, with finding Frank is because he admires him, because he sees some of himself in that kid, but also because he throws himself deeply into a case like this, not having anything else to do, anywhere else to go, and he's trying to distract himself from the fact that he isn't living the life that he wishes he was living. And so the question with him is, does he not have a life because he throws himself into his work, or does he throw himself into his work because he doesn't have a life? And at the end of the day, that kind of ends up being Frank's problem to some degree as well, because he lost his family and then tried to have another family, and that didn't work because he wasn't doing things above board. And all he has to fall back on is, well, here's this thing I'm really good at. And the same is true of Hanratty, where, well, here's this thing I'm really good at. I'm really good at chasing down bad guys and, finding clues and being a detective. And at the end of the day, they are more alike than they are different, and they come together. And that's that's really cool. Like I said, that it's the singular guy who maybe kind of even thinks that he hates this kid, who actually is after him because he admires him so much, that ultimately leads him to redemption, and maybe finds his own to some degree with that as well. Before I close, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Flash thing. I know everybody's probably wondering, how have you not mentioned the Flash thing yet? I don't know, I just hadn't gotten there. Frank Abagnale likes comic books, and one of the first aliases he uses is Barry Allen. And it's interesting because this is before as many people would have known that Barry Allen thing as do now. So, because the Flash TV show got popular, and because there's a Flash in the DC movies, and we've been waiting for that Flash movie for like a million years now, more people know who Barry Allen is, and so if you showed this movie to a lot of people now, they'd probably immediately go, oh yes, you mentioned Flash comics earlier, and now he's saying he's Barry Allen. But in 2002, a lot of people didn't know that, and were probably as surprised as Hanratty was when he found out, oh, Barry Allen is the main character in the Flash. He is the Flash. And when I first saw this, first of all, I was just surprised by that many Flash references in a movie. That seemed, at the time, kind of obscure, because, you'd get Batman and Superman references, Spider-Man references. That's kind of the extent of it. You didn't expect that anybody would really know anything about comic books that hadn't spawned characters that were huge in television and movies yet, especially in live action. And here we've got all these Flash references. And yeah, he got a short-lived TV show in the early 90s, but kind of helps to prove my point. It was short-lived. It didn't do well enough. It got canceled. And so it's interesting with historical perspective, looking back on this and seeing that Flash was the character that they chose. I don't know if any of that happened in real life, if he was a comic book reader, or if the Flash specifically was a thing that he used in his con artistry, but it goes really well with this motif, of course. Fastest man alive, catch me if you can. This kid is running away from the FBI, and they can't catch him. I think it's kind of inventive, and not, at the time anyway, the most obvious thing to go to, and fun that it pops up as much as it does. Like, it would have been way more obvious to do like a Roadrunner Wile E. Coyote thing, to like rope Hanratty into this, be like, you're Wile E. Coyote, I'm the Roadrunner, you're never gonna catch me, and we don't do it that way. This is, in its way, I guess, it's a tad bit more subtle than that, but fun to use real comics, and that motif goes through so much of it. That was really cool. And the James Bond stuff is really fun too. And if it wasn't trying to be, at least to some degree, a comedy, we probably wouldn't have gotten that stuff. And it's not, again, it's not over-the-top comedy, it's not intrusive, it doesn't get in your face about it. It feels like the right flavor from this guy's perspective. So anyway, that is my review of Catch Me If You Can. Thanks a lot for watching. This went longer than I had anticipated, but I guess I had a lot to say. This is one I like a lot. It was a lot of fun to get to talk about finally, and I want to thank Tom again. I want to thank Tom once again for the request on Patreon. If you would like to request a movie or a comic for me to ramble on about, you can go to patreon.com/geekvolution and become a $15 patron. You can do it just one time, let it roll over to the next month, pay your $15, and I will do one request for you, or you can stick around at that level and I will give you a request on rotation. We have several people there right now, so every 2 to 3 months or so, you'll probably get one, so totally up to you, but that's how you do it, and if you have any more questions, let me know about it, and leave your comments, let me know what you think about Catch Me If You Can, and in the meantime, I was Captain Logan, and I'll see you again, without a win, next time.